And as we deepen on the spiritual journey, we realize that we have everything. And it doesn't mean that I don't gain from merging and playing this dance with another, because I do gain from this. So it's this interesting dance of I have everything, I need nothing, and yet still I gain from dancing with you in this partnership.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney and Jenkins. Hello and welcome to the 90th episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This episode I have with me Erin French. Erin is a psychic medium, Akashic Reader, and spiritual practitioner for over 30 years, with a deep non-dual foundation rooted in the Daoist teachings. Erin creates a grounded and heart-centered container within which the Akashic Records and messages from our guides and angels are revealed. During a deep period of awakening in 2019, Erin started receiving increasingly frequent messages from his own ancestors, as well as a constellation of spirit guides and higher angels, all of whom communicate through him with the sole purpose of encouraging our collective awakening. They have shared the deep truth of our unity with the universe, and that right now is a period of powerful transformation within the Earth's energy field. I had a wonderful time speaking with Erin and getting to know his story and hearing his wisdom and making all of the connections between different parts of his life that led him to where he is now. So much so that this episode is nearly 2 hours long. And sometimes that happens when you're able to dive in deep with someone and get to the real complexities of being able to talk about the nuances of energy and spirituality. And I kind of geek out on that sometimes. And happy that Erin was able to join me in that. So here is the wisdom from Erin French.
I'm happy to let it organically unfold.
Good, because that's exactly what it's going to be. A way to give you a platform to share your story and your wisdom
Yeah,
from following your inner voice or your authenticity along the way.
beautiful.
What I'll do also is a separate bio introduction of you
Okay.
after this, so I don't have to be like, hey, Erin, tell me everything about you, like initially up front, because I think that's kind of a boring way to start a conversation.
I love that. Yeah. And that's always a little, honestly, I appreciate that. Thank you. Because it's always a little awkward too to know, like, how deep do I go? How short? Like those are always not my favorite part. So I love just jumping in somewhere else. So
Really.
we can talk all night. Let's go.
My
Okay.
longest one so far is 4 hours, but we don't have to go that long either.
Amazing. Okay. Okay.
The theme of my podcast is about following your inner voice or your intuition or your authenticity or the duende or the daimon, whatever you feel like calling it. And because I feel like you're in a position where you guide people to connect with that part of themselves.
Yes.
You had to go through a lot of things along the way in order to get to where you are to be that guide for people. So, one of the first things that I like to ask is, when is the first time that you recognized this voice within yourself and you were able to follow it?
I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much. I know that, when I was a child, I didn't go to normal school at all until fourth grade. And before that time, there was a school I went to, but it was mostly sort of, now we'd call it unschooled, mostly up and through that point. And I know during that whole period, I had a deep connection to my childlike intuition and just had a lot of freedom, but nothing specific jumps out until I did go to school in fourth grade, and then my transition into the real world, if you will, was pretty difficult. And that, through elementary school and into middle school, and then here I am in the summer between middle school and high school. And I was kind of anxious. I wanted to change things around. I was a really happy child earlier, and the transition into normal school made me kind of insecure and kind of withdrawn. And I wasn't so happy. I had a stutter and I was kind of awkward. And I was like nervous about high school. And this voice powerfully came to me in the night. I was awake. It wasn't a dream. I was awake. This voice came to me and very powerfully said to me, Aaron, you create your world. You can be anything that you want. And I remember this like it was yesterday. And I believed it. And I believed it, this voice. And I was like, okay. And I started to take steps to shift in the direction that I wanted, which at the time, beginning of high school was like popularity and girls, whatever. Like that's what it was at the time. But the looking back, the meaning of that was just, at the time we didn't have this language of manifestation that we do now, but it was really like encouraging me to step into my own power and recognize my own strength in co-creating my world. And I did, and it took me a minute, but by like sophomore year, I had recreated and reinvented myself entirely, and I just followed this energy of believing. And that was a powerful experience for me in recognizing the co-creation that I had in the universe. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. As far as your upbringing goes, it seems like you didn't really have a traditional upbringing as far as schooling even went. What about your connection to like religion or spirituality? How was that introduced to you when you were young?
Yeah. Like my parents split when I was really little, so I had I was back and forth between my mom's house and my dad's house, of course. And my mom, neither of my parents were religious. Um, Both came from religious backgrounds, but both had sort of rejected organized religion. And my mom rejected it in the way of still really infusing my childhood with a really deep sense of spiritual wonder. And, she, especially when I was really little, was really deep into astrology and tarot cards. And she read us a lot of fantasy novels and, books about magic and connection and nature. And so I grew up with this perspective of really deep wonder. On my dad's side, I come from my grandfather, great grandfather, great uncle, and I think more of my grandparents on my dad's side were all ministers, Presbyterian ministers. And my dad was not. He was a doctor and had a difficult relationship with his father, my grandfather, and so he rejected religion vehemently. And I
Mm.
was raised non-religiously, but also a little bit with a negative viewpoint inherited from my dad's distaste for his father and his upbringing in the church. And so there was a time when I was little when I identified, I think very naively, but I think in high school, whatever, I identified as sort of agnostic or atheistic, which is funny to me now because now I'm deeply animistic and I see everything as divine and connected and I talk to spirits and angels and whatever, all the things. So just to skip ahead to that, but like as a child, I had to find my way back. So I had this really sort of magical early childhood, and then school happened as I mentioned, and it was this really deep shock where I was raised so separate from normal society that when I entered school, I was expect even the simple things of like raising your hand to go to the bathroom or not having to follow rule, like all of these things where everything was foreign to me. It was as if I was an alien. And my parents were sort of out to lunch in this respect and didn't give me any support at all for this transition. So I sort of collapsed into myself and lost consciously all my connection with sort of the wonder and mystery. Oh yeah, but I want to loop back. When I was a kid, though, I somehow knew that I had some magic, and I remember that I had this way where I would tuck and push my fingers into the corners of my eyes like this, um, into the bridge of my nose. And if I could see a blue light in my eyes shine when I did that, I was like, okay, I'm good. I still have my magic. I don't know where I got that or how that developed, but I just knew that if
Oh,
I could push my fingers against my nose and my eye sockets and just a little blue light appeared, I was like, okay, I'm good. I got
what
this.
what did that like represent for you?
It represented my own personal power and safety and
Uh-huh.
connection, like the safety through connection with the universe in some way. And I forgot all about that until a number of years ago as I've awakened into the universe and I remembered and I started to laugh about that I used to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and your mom read your stories about fantasy and was supportive of supporting your magical
Magical
powers within.
nature. And
Yeah.
in my little hippie school, we didn't like when I went to fourth grade, I didn't know anything. I didn't know I could barely read. I could, but barely. I learned very late. I couldn't do any math. I didn't know anything traditionally about the normal subjects that they had studied. I didn't know how to spell. My handwriting was terrible. I'm dyslexic also, which was undiagnosed. But we did when I was little. I remember we did do things like someone came in and taught us about auras and taught us, very hippie, and taught us how to actually we did this game where we would actually cut our friends' auras with our hands energetically, and then they would be weaker, and then we would repair their auras and they'd be stronger again, and things like this. So I
Oh,
did do things like that, even though I didn't learn anything traditionally I should have learned during those ages.
was that in California also? Wait, is
This
that
was in
right?
California. Yeah. Yeah. This was in California, in Sacramento.
Okay. So I don't know, those skills when you're at that age and learning that when your brain is so adaptive to imagination and anyway, that seems like almost a superpower.
And again, going to this hard transition, when I had to go to school, I really resented the time. I learned to resent the time in my sort of early hippie childhood. Now that I've come into full circle and I'm a few years later, I'm really grateful. And one of the things that I realized it did for me was that I've always known on some level that the world, the way I've moved through the world was like everything is sort of a construct. Like we create, again, like this idea that we create what's around us. And like the world around me was real. And I became a scientist and I became a MBA business executive. And then different things. But all of that was like almost all I can act. Like, oh, I can do this now. I can try on this costume and do this for a while. It's real, but also like almost like a play. Like I could step into any situation and just create myself in the way that was needed to be that thing, but I wasn't that thing. And I know I received that from this early experience I got in some deep way. Yeah, I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, you could sort of create your own story, which I feel like is might be a thread to the Akashic things that you're doing currently. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So the moment in your bedroom where you heard that voice, how did you make sense of that going forward?
It was so powerful and clear. And like looking back, like there's no other moment like that in my early childhood, all through even my teenage, even through my until my early 20s when I started to receive more messages. So let's just say all the way through college, like that was a singular experience of like deep clarity. It was so clear that I didn't even try to put it in any context. I really didn't. I just was like, I received a message. I know this now. It was just like that. And I didn't, at the time, I wasn't trying to make sense of the world really in that way. I think I was so in myself still that changing my own world and my own experience was enough of a experience. And I didn't need or even have the ability or bandwidth to look beyond and ask why until
Oh yeah.
until later, until college, when I was studying to be a scientist, I was a biologist, but even then, that's when, spirituality again, sort of a deeper awareness of the expansiveness of the world started to come to me in ways unexpectedly that I couldn't deny. Um, yeah. So years later.
Okay. The voice that said you can create your own life. Did you listen to that?
Yeah, yeah, I did. I did. And, one of the ways that I did was like when I went to high school, I previously had this worldview from this point of view of insecurity and embarrassment for being such a weirdo when I went to school for the first time and not understanding the rules that I carried that forward with me all the way through middle school. And I just dropped that. And I went to high school assuming that people would like me and that I was popular and that I could get along and interact with everybody. And like that was just literally like a 180 mental shift for me. It literally was just like click. Oh, now I'm going to act like this.
Mhm.
Now I am this, or now when I act like this going forward, I will be that. It was like that. I just believed it because it was just so powerfully strong, this voice that came through. Very grateful. I've been shown more recently, and this is a fun part too. So I've been shown more recently, very recently in the last 2 years, I was shown a vision that from my guides that this actually was myself in the future going back in time to wake myself up. So that's really fun. That's a new, like recent little fun time twister of joy. And it was like, this is yourself in the future, just knowing how to go back and talk to yourself. To at this pivotal moment, give yourself the boost you need to live the life that you're meant to live. So
That's cool.
that's a really fun little twist.
It is, for sure. Okay. So you went through high school with this new perspective and mindset.
Yes.
And were you accepted? Did you feel like you were able to like
Yeah, by, and looking back, I know this is silly and juvenile what I'm going to say next, but like I did become the popular kid with the leather jacket, walking around school and like dating the girls that I wanted to date, which again at the time was important for me. It was a symbol of like success in those things, and again, fully acknowledging, looking back, like, well, maybe I could have done something else with that knowledge, but that's what I did at the time. And went off to college. But, so I just acknowledge all that. Like it was still very, looking back again, small and self-referential. Like, what can I get out of this? How can, what can I be for myself in a very kind of individual way around this? I didn't bring that out into the rest. I didn't really expand it out as I do now to like, oh, if I can create my world, what is possible out here in a more deeper way.
yeah, so did you continue to reject the earlier part of your life and your schooling throughout that period to get through?
I did. I did. And I was really kind of resentful. Yeah, and looking back, exactly as you allude to, it was a part of my new image creation. At the time, I was fragile enough that I kind of had to reject the old version of me and pretend, again, I was almost pretending and acting and trying on a new suit of behavior, of beingness that, I didn't have the maturity and the bandwidth emotionally to accept that I could be both, that I could have been that and now I'm this. I had to push away that part of that earlier part of myself, which I was a little bit ashamed of because it was really different too, especially in high school. We're so worried about fitting in, or I was so concerned about fitting in and being the same. And my upbringing was not the same as anybody. We lived on a little 1 acre farm with my mom where we had our own rabbits and chickens, and I like ate rabbits and raised our own food and grew organic, weird heirloom vegetables that no one had heard of. And I was weird by most standards of the people I was around. And so I tried to hide that to be normal and fit in.
Yeah, yeah, we tend, I think that's a pretty typical response of trying to suppress what you think hurt you in not being able to fit in.
Yes, 100%. So I did that. It wasn't, until in college was when I went to UC San Diego, and there was a hippie farm collective, and there was sort of a organic hippie-ish restaurant, and I had to work to pay for part of school, and so I joined that restaurant, which was part of this sort of hippie collective of businesses. And there were more people that all of a sudden were like, oh, that's cool. You grew up on a little farm and knew about heirloom vegetables. So I was started to like regain the acceptance of reclaiming more parts of myself through those years.
Yeah, as college like exposes you to a lot of different people and
Mhm.
cultures too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Was there a moment that you did reconnect with that part of yourself again? Or because you studied science, so is that
Exactly. Yeah, so that took me, and there was a lot of pressure from my dad in particular, to be a scientist and to be an ecologist. I have a great grandfather who's sort of a very famous botanist and very eminent. And my dad really pushed me to follow in his footsteps. And it was really important that I was successful and did those things. So there was a deep part of me that was like, I will be a famous, successful, world-renowned scientist, and there's no question. And I just internalized that pressure from my dad. Um, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it. So I studied that through school. But my senior year, I had an opportunity to do a study abroad program in Costa Rica, where I was going to study the tropical ecology up in the mountains of Costa Rica. And on the trip down there, my friends and I, a few friends and I who were going to be in this program, we traveled from San Diego overland by little buses all the way down through Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, all the way down through Central America to Costa Rica for this program for a few months. And I was in Belize City, and my friends and I, were still in college, and we were like, okay, we want to get high. We want to get some Belizean, cannabis, ganja, and smoke it up. So we found this young Rasta guy just in the square and just asked him, hey, can you get us some weed? And he said, sure. And so he took us down this long, we walked deep into the city through these roads and then small paths and then small little dirt paths through these little huts, and went into the small little hut dirt floor, and he broke out a bag and rolled us these huge joints, one for each of us, these massive cigar-sized joints, and we all smoked and had a good time. I ended up sort of semi-passing out. And I don't know what was in this. I think it was just weed, but it could have been something else, just cannabis, but who knows? I have no idea. I ended up sort of semi-passing out and then finding myself floating, my first out-of-body experience,
Mm.
floating out of my body, looking at my body, floating first at the roof of the hut, looking down at myself, and then floating as if there was no roof, just up into the sky. And there was a little thin thread, like a little thin silver thread that connected me to my body. And I kept floating out and out and out and feeling the pull higher and higher and higher. And it was deliciously, magically, seductively blissful. And I wanted to keep expanding and keep experiencing that and go further and explore. And then a part of my brain kicked in and said, but wait a minute, you don't even know where you are. And if you're this high, you don't even know if your friends are watching you or if you're safe. And if you could keep going, will you just die in the body and keep going out into the universe? Like, what's really happening here? And with that thought, because I had, truly no idea, with that thought, I came crashing down into my body. And I sort of, like woke up, if you will, or opened my eyes and looked around and sat up in this little hut. And my friends were in their own little universe wherever they were. And I sort of, okay, so I looked around, and on the floor next to me in this little hut in Belize was the book Be Here Now by Ram Dass, his sort of seminal spiritual work. And I, in that state of just being out of body for the first time, if you know this book, I opened it and flipped it open. And it's this book with these amazing spiritually transmitted words and phrases and crazy pictures in every page of this kaleidoscope of a spiritual experience. And it just, again, I was going down to be a scientist. I was a rational scientist. I wasn't particularly open to any of these things spiritually. And these messages and images and picture just like entered my psyche in a deep way. And just like, again, it was this moment of just like shifting of consciousness. Um, and I went down to Costa Rica after that and fell in love with the tropics and the jungle and the trees and all of that. Um, and had a great experience, and still thought I was, my path was primarily going to be science, and I was going to be a famous now tropical biologist, now that I fell in love with the tropics. Um,
I'm trying to put the connection together of your grandfather being a botanist
yeah.
and plant medicines and how
Yeah.
those two things might be integrated.
I love that. And I did take mushrooms in college, and that was a deep out in Joshua Tree with my friends, and that was a really profound experience. But I didn't really deeply appreciate plant medicines in the context of botany and that way. I still kind of kept them very separate for many, many years. And actually, it was actually very recently, um, you know, doing more of the plant medicines over time. And then just recently, I came back from Peru where I did a 21-day plant dieta. And what that means, for those who don't know, is that you actually you do some ayahuasca, but you also take the extract and receive the spirit from the shaman of particular master plant teachers, they call them. So you receive the spirits of the tree teachers for these tribes, for these lineages, and connect. And I was there for 21 days in this experience, get a really deep transmission of the spirit of the forest in Peru. Um, which was a deep, it felt like exactly like your question, like a deep coming home in full circle of my experience because after college I did for years become a tropical biologist. I lived in the jungle for many years. I traveled around and lived in tents, lived in platforms, lived in the forest, but again as a scientist. So I was living, and so coming back to the plant medicine, fully being there to connect spiritually with the trees that I used to study felt like a really deep healing completion that I feel really powerfully, beautifully settled about.
Yeah, I couldn't help but make that connection.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. And it
Yeah.
was, decades in the making, and as it happened, it feels amazing to for my own life journey to have that full circle have happened.
Okay, so you're in college, you went on this study abroad program, and then what happened?
Yeah, then I went out in the world, I graduated, and I was like, okay, now I'm on my path. I'm going to be the scientist. And I ended up going to different places around. At first, I call it my biobum phase, where I was an intern as to get experience working for, room and board and maybe a tiny bit of money or maybe no money and just a little bit of enough to live. And I did a lot of, 6 months here, 3 months there, working for other scientists or government intern jobs or research centers around the world here and there. And what happened, like for one of these places, I was a naturalist up in Aspen in Colorado, working at the nature center there. And as an intern, we got a condo in Aspen to share, a bunch of us, and then enough money for food, and then we just hung out. Um, but like my first teacher of non-duality appeared to me while I was there, which I didn't realize until years later. At the time, there was this man that showed up, and he was this cool guy who made rattles and drums. And I thought that was really cool. I grown up with some drums in the house, like African hand drums. And so it was like, oh, I want to learn that from him. And he took a liking to me. And so he took me to his cabin one weekend with the purpose of like apprenticing with him all weekend to learn this trade, this craft. So the first morning, I remember waking up and I was like, okay, let's go. And he's like, just sit and drink your tea. And we were sitting on the porch looking out at the aspens of this mountain cabin, middle of nowhere. And all weekend was like that. He was like, just breathe, just relax, just drink your tea. We got plenty of time. It's
Mhm.
okay. Just be here. As he was teaching me how to make these rattles and drums and all of the things that I wanted to learn. And I was impatient and maybe ungrateful and kind of like at the time like bristling against the slowness and the wasted opportunity for more learning. And again, it wasn't until years later that I realized as I've awakened, I realized in this moment of epiphany, like, wow, what a gift he offered me to show me and transmit this spaciousness of connection in a way that I had never received before. And I realized he was I think in his mind, I'm really clear, it was very conscious. In my mind, it was unconscious. My first really direct spiritual teacher and mentor that transmitted these things. So like unbeknownst to my goals, which was like I'm a scientist and I'm going to go learn this thing, teachers began to appear and I began to just soak up the knowledge of a deeper, expansive way. Shortly thereafter, I went and got a job in Africa, where I was first there as a research assistant. Then I went back to get a master's and study the birds and monkeys in Cameroon. So I was in this jungle, the Congo Basin rainforest, for about 2 years. And I lived side by side with the Baka hunter-gatherer indigenous people of that forest who have lived in that forest since before time. They're these, traditionally nomadic hunter-gatherers, and they were my guides every day through the forest.
Mm.
So I would be there with my binoculars, looking at birds and monkeys and the fruits and recording, all their behaviors and activities and counting them. And they would be helping me do that and supporting that, but also collecting the fruits and the leaves and the mushrooms and the roots and honey from the trees and telling stories just as we walked around about all the things and the connections. And what became apparent just living with them over, almost 2 years was just, and it took me a long time. It was so subtle, but so profound, just the depth of integration that they
Mm.
have with the forest, how deeply they are, and it took me a minute to even realize what was so disconcerting around it for me as I sort of integrated their worldview, because most of us in the West have this view that there's us and there's nature. There's cities and there's, human-made, man-made things and buildings, and then there's nature, and there's this idea that, humans go and destroy nature, and that, and to do that we have to be separate. Or even as an ecologist and conservationist at the time, I was like, oh, I'm here to study and fix nature and help it regenerate. I'm here to fix it. But even again, that ass- that assumes that I'm separate from nature. And their whole worldview was that they were nature. They are the forest. There was
Mm.
no separation. And that just took a long time to seep into me, and then just like twisted in a good way, and like shook up my whole consciousness of what was possible for humanity. It just shifted everything.
It also seems to maybe connect with the schooling that you had when you were a kid.
Looking back, I see that. At the time, I didn't. At the time, I was still like, this was my master's, and I was going to do, you know, and I did, really deep research and do these
Mm.
amazing publications and have the best, get famous for discovering the secrets of the rainforest and the connections and the deep patterns. And, I was very much even then, working like crazy 6 days a week, entering notebooks of data with numbers and figures and measurements and all the things of a rational mind that we do. And I wasn't looking for those connections at the time. I wasn't asking for them. Looking back, I see what they showed me and how it shifted my mind at the time. I did feel the change in consciousness, and I enjoyed it, but I also was like, okay, that's cool, but I'm this. I still didn't include myself in that fully. I was like, oh, okay, these people, my friends are like this, and I'm
Yeah.
over here still being the scientist, and I'm gonna like figure everything out.
What is it that you were seeking by gathering all of that data?
I mean, fame and fortune is the honest answer. But, my question was related to how do the birds and monkeys eat the fruits, and then through regurgitation or pooping them out, how do those seeds then grow back and regenerate the forest? And how is that different in primary dense forest? And I had colleagues who then worked on the edge of the forest to look at how is it different in secondary forest versus primary forest. So disturbed forest by villages versus in the middle of the jungle. So there was a number of scientists over years that were looking at different parts of this question. There was botanists looking at the plant side. I was looking at the birds and monkey side, looking at their movements, different pieces of these questions of forest regeneration. Yeah,
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
Okay, so you had the experience in Africa, and then what happened after that? How did you integrate that experience into the rest of going forward?
Yeah, I came back, and I had all this data, and it was really kind of deeply disorienting for me. I started to, finish up my research and write papers and give talks and be on my path of like becoming an academic scientist. And I was decently good at it. I won awards for my talks and published a few papers and applied and got accepted at the time to what was my dream PhD, which, I was an ornithologist and ecologist. And so for that, the place to go is Cornell. That's the number one ornithology school in the world. And I really applied with deep integrity and submitted my best paper and put a lot of time and care. Like that was a deep dream of mine to go there, and I got accepted. And as I got accepted, I was also in the middle of disillusionment with that whole process. And I
Mm.
deferred for a year and I turned it down. I was like, oh, I got what I wanted, but actually it's not really what I wanted. And I saw enough, I'd been far enough on the path of academia that I saw at this point was sort of the turning point when I saw how disconnected it was from the deeper reality that I was experiencing, how sort of separate, and how my mentors were so focused on their subjects in small ways that they eat and breathed and lived entirely their small, with all respect and beauty to those paths. I was like, oh, that's not me. I'm a little bit more broad. I'm a little bit more diffusive. I'm a little more spacious in my perspective now. I need to leave that behind. So I deferred for a year and then I turned it down, and then I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have a clue. For the first time in my life, I had no idea because this was my plan for as long as I had had to have a plan for my adult life. I was certain that this was it. And then I got there and I didn't want it. So there was this oh heck moment of what am I going to do now? And I had no plan. So I had to work, as I mentioned, through undergrad as a cook. That's just what happened. I needed a job and I got a job as a cook in this cafe, and I learned to become a chef through my undergrad. So I was like, well, okay, I can cook. I can fall back on that. So I got jobs, a couple jobs in the Bay Area, working in restaurants, and pretty quickly landed in an executive chef job for an opening cafe and ran that for like over a decade, the founding chef. During that time, through a random sequence, of course, there was a girl I had a crush on, and she was out of town, and she came to town and was like, "Oh, come meet me here." And so I was like, "Absolutely, I'll go meet you here, wherever that is." And I went into this little random house and walked in, and there's this guy giving a spiritual talk. And without expecting to, I felt a deep spiritual resonance, and I left. And I remember walking out to the car with her afterwards and saying, like, okay, what just happened? Like, what's going on here? Within a few months of that, I had initiated with him as my guru, and I moved in with him and lived and studied with this tantric guru for a couple of years. Um, and worked as a cook for a while and just like completely turned around then from being, okay, I'm going to be this famous scientist to now I'm living with my guru and studying classical Indian Tantra and doing pujas and wearing beads and putting, tilak on my forehead and like bowing and prostrating to the gods. That's what I did.
Amazing. Could you explain a little bit what Tantra is for the listeners? Because I feel like that word is thrown around a lot and people don't really know like the weight of what it really entails. So
For sure. Thank you for that. And I really appreciate it. So most people in the West, if they know what Tantra is at all, it's associated with sexuality and some kind of, sacred sexuality, maybe even that, but kind of maybe unclear. And that is not incorrect entirely, but the Tantra that I studied and the classical Tantra is a spiritual view that accepts everything as sacred. And so most traditions, when this tantra became, this is many thousands of years ago, but at the time, even most of the spiritual traditions said, okay, the world is messy. And if you want to live a spiritual life, you want to live in an ashram or cut yourself off, be renunciate, don't have a partner, give up most foods, live a simple life. And that's the way to be spiritual. So most of the traditions at the time were doing that. The tantrics at the time said, again, many thousands of years ago, said, well, that's all good and fine, but actually everything is sacred because everything is one. We will accept everything as sacred and a path towards God and union with all things. And so that included the things that were explicitly rejected, including the sexuality, including using drugs and substances, including at the time in India, there was a strong prohibition around touching anyone who was dead or going to the burial grounds or where they burn the bodies. So the tantrics would go there and practice in the places where at the time they burned dead bodies. Anything that was forbidden, the
mm,
tantric path said, we'll bring this in and everything is sacred and we'll use this energies, even if they're more difficult energies, we'll use them for our spiritual transformation. And so, for example, I learned a lot of practices of internal alchemy where, through breath work and energy work and visualization, we would take these heavier energies and transform them into spiritual energy to use for our spiritual growth.
okay.
Well,
Another time, another form of education for you.
it felt like that because, comes from the Vedic tradition, and it was very the Indian traditions broadly, as I understand them, are very detailed, very deep, a lot of information, and I saw it as another version. It was a sort of mind candy of another version of learning this entire world system and this entire world view that is vast, but also very complete, and entirely different from what I had grown up with and experienced. And so I really told my friends, like, oh, I'm getting sort of a master's in Tantra, even though that wasn't true. But energetically, I was doing that again. I was still sort of on this path of grabbing and learning and assimilating different knowledge.
Were you able to take what you had experienced in Africa and apply it to that as well and see the parallels?
A little tiny bit looking back. Um, I still, so at the time, I still hadn't integrated, like we mentioned in high school, where I had pushed away and rejected those parts of myself that I was ashamed of. And, in college, I had a little bit of integration, but really still, there were lots of parts of my childhood, my upbringing, my family, the way, my family operated, et cetera, that I still had a lot of pain, a lot of shadow, a lot of disconnection, and a lot of avoidance. And so I wasn't very good at integrating in a deep way. I was still going through the world, looking back again, still deeply sort of cut off and alone in a lot of ways and acting from my pain and my shadow parts. So I wasn't able to deeply integrate a little bit, but really not so much until years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where did you go from the
So
tantra?
I was in that for a while, and at the same time overlapping with that teacher, a bunch of us. There was another teacher in the Bay Area where I lived, and I was living in the East Bay, um, east of San Francisco. There was another teacher there who was a Daoist teacher who I also started to sit with and study with at the same time I was with my guru. As it happens with gurus and teachers, one day after a couple years of studying with him, and I was like making his websites, running his retreats, supporting people coming into the group, sort of deeply embedded in this whole community. Words began to be bandied around like rape and abuse and theft and things like this that my guru was accused of. And these accusations came from people I considered my family and my dear friends in the community. And one day he called us all together and said, I'm going to dissolve the school. I'm dissolving the teachings. I'm no longer your guru. I'm just going to be a spiritual mentor. And most of the students recognized that that was just his way of like dissolving the school and then recreating it so he couldn't be sued, and he was sort of dissolving the ability to be prosecuted in any way. But I took that as to heart when he said, I'm no longer your teacher, no longer your guru. And I separated from that group, which was also sort of a deep shock for me. I did continue to study with my Taoist teacher thereafter, but I also sort of for a number of years thereafter also at times turned away from spirituality and said like, oh, I don't believe any of this. This is also all fake. I had some periods of disillusionment, and there were some dark times for me the following years from that. Um, yeah, so I went from science to this tantra, and then I became disillusioned with science, and I went to this tantric spiritual path and became disillusioned with that. I also had some Taoism in there, which to this day, the Taoist piece, my Taoist teacher is the biggest spiritual influence now in my life and carries me forward in a deep way. But in the midst of that, there were some periods when I was just like, I'm going to reject all of this. But then I didn't have anything to fall back on at all. I was like, oh, then I have nothing, right? If I'm rejecting science and rejecting the spirituality, then what is there? I guess there's just me again.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of going to ask you next, I think, is did you have a moment where you stopped chasing, trying to find something within someone else to help you and found it within yourself?
I mean, the honest answer, I love the way you phrase that in terms of find it within someone else. I mean, the honest answer is I got married and then divorced and then got married again within pretty quickly. So I tried to find it in my partners, both of those. And then my second marriage ended. My first marriage after a couple years, my second marriage after 10 years, um, ended. So I was trying to find it in those relationships and trying to find it in within my interpersonal dynamics, but I still hadn't really done the work I needed. In 2018 was when that second marriage dissolved. And that's when I finally surrendered.
Mhm.
2018 was when, after my second marriage dissolved, was when I finally surrendered and sort of had another sort of aha moment when I realized I can no longer continue like this. I need to make some changes.
2018. What were you doing in your life outside of your marriage during that time?
Yeah, so I mentioned I had become a chef for a long time, and that was great while it was great, but it's really hard on my hands. I was getting like carpal tunnel issues and things like that, repetitive stress injuries. So I went back for my second master's. I got an MBA at Berkeley where I was living so I did, they had a working evening weekend program for the MBA at Berkeley while I was working as a chef. So I went back and got my MBA, and that moved me into, because I had been an ecologist and worked in the food industry, I became at first, I did food sustainability for a nonprofit, and then I got hired into a large supermarket chain to be a supply chain senior manager, and then moved up and became, directors of different startups. And I worked in the food industry as a food executive, ultimately becoming a COO. So working in logistics, supply chain operations, sourcing, sustainability for food companies. So I was doing that work broadly. Yeah, so I was a business executive. When that marriage broke up, I had been working for, I was working for Blue Apron at the time, which was a big startup, was the fastest growing, it's pretty much collapsed now, but at the time it was the fastest growing food company in the world. And I was the head of supply chain for all of the inputs. And we had facilities in California, Texas, and New Jersey and New York. And so I was in charge of teams in all of those locations, flying around the country, flying around on being flown in private jets to do these huge deals because everyone was like courting us to be, again, we were the fastest growing darling food company that ever existed. So people would send their private jets to me. They'd fly us out to various locations. We'd do big deals. I'd fly around the country. I was sort of this big shot with an expense account, um, going out to fancy meals all the time, being wined and dined by folks and doing boardroom deals. That's what I did for those years. And I liked it superficially, but I was really kind of empty and dead inside. And ended up leaving that job as well, right before and during the the dissolution of my marriage. And so it was that fall when I was like, okay, my job is not going. I got a different job in the food industry, but that, it's like, okay, that isn't really fulfilling me. These two relationships didn't really work out. After number two, I can't really blame entirely everyone else for all of my problems. Maybe I need to take some a little bit more responsibility. Oh shucks, how do I do that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's very aware of yourself.
Well, and so again, this was the second time when I had a late night visitation of epiphany of awareness. So at this point, I was, in a period of depression, and I was sort of staying up late watching Netflix until 3 or 4 in the morning when I was just so tired, I would just fall asleep exhausted because I didn't want to lie there and think and deal with my situation. So I would just and then wake up and pound six cups of coffee and then repeat. I'd been doing that for a few months of just sort of self-destructive avoidant behavior. And one night, middle of the night, at some point, I was awake. And again, this awareness came to me. And it was like, if you continue like this, if this is your life, you're already dead. And I had this vision of my life going forward where I saw this energy, this path of like avoidance and self-destruction and just sort of blaming and non-responsibility. And I saw the emptiness of my path forward through that. And I saw the isolation and the smallness of it. I was shown this in this vision in the night. And I immediately again was like, okay, I need to make a change. This is not who I am anymore. And so the actions, at the time, I had gone in and out of my acceptance of spirituality and the spiritual part of my life. But at the time, I was still actually in a down period of disillusionment of like, meh, spirituality, meh, pushing it away. And so I looked online for I'd heard of these men's weekend programs. I didn't really know much about them. And I Googled men's group, and I looked for some that had no spiritual overtones at all. you know, and I found a couple programs that were simply like transformational men's work or whatever they said, but like there was one I found that had some reference to God, and I was like, no, not that one. No. And so I found these programs and they weren't for a few more months, but looking back, like even that decision to change started to make a change, of course. Right. As soon as we make it, as soon as we're, even if it's the program might be a few months away, but as soon as we decide to change, the change starts to happen. But what happened in this first men's group, which was a few months later, and this was like, so we did, somatic healing, group work, coming in, experiences to come into our power, things like this. In that program, I ended up realizing that I didn't know where my heart was. And in that program, I found through this exercise where I was in a small group with a facilitator and I was like dragging my heart out of a deep, dark cave with a big,
Mm.
huge, heavy chain. And I was like going back into a cave and still not seeing my heart, and then finding a chain and dragging my heart out into myself, like doing this whole somatic experience of reclaiming myself and, other things like that. And I reconnected before that weekend, even this experience, I had just totally surrendered. I had just like, okay, just can't go forward anymore like I was. I completely surrender. I completely give up. I don't know where I go from here, but I just like, I'm done like that. And I'm just like, I'm done. Enough suffering, enough stuff. And there are other things that happened throughout the life that, that had been difficult. So when I surrendered and opened my heart and found my heart again in this way, and then just what happened was that the spiritual connection, my connection to all things, my connection to the trees and the sky and the spirits and God and everything just came flooding in ways that was like a tsunami of spirit, a tsunami of love, a tsunami of God, a tsunami of connection in ways that for weeks, maybe months, for a while, there was so much ecstasy and joy and connection and love and union and connectedness that I was just like crying all the time. And I was still a food executive trying to like keep my life together. But I would go out in the parking lot between meetings and just like sob and then wipe my tears and go in and do a different negotiation or do whatever I was doing during this time.
Yeah.
And had
Or
this just massive. So this was the first time of like deep, massive, real awakening and self-reflection in a real way as an adult. Before this, I was still sort of looking through a smaller lens, and through my deep surrender, I just was able to see more clearly than I ever had before.
yeah, do you remember like previous to that like reconnection with finding your heart the last time that you felt that or knew where your heart was?
I mean, I think it literally was when I was in that childhood state before I went to school as a child and so young, you know, and lived my whole life sort of with that part of me locked away and really focusing on my brain, my rationality, my intellect, to keep me going through all of this. And, the brain's wonderful. Thank you, brain. And also, the brain isn't all of us. And we are not our brain. There's more to us than our brain. But for most of my life, I didn't really know that. Even having gone through years and having a guru and other teachers and living, in spiritual environments, even through those years of doing that, it still didn't break through and teach me that. I might have known it, but I didn't experience it until these years later when I surrendered and expected nothing at all. I didn't expect any spiritual renaissance. I just wanted to heal myself in a Western psychological way. And then as I opened myself up, the spirit just flowed in ways that it hasn't stopped. It just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah. So you're able to integrate with the spirituality now.
Finally, thank goodness. Finally, it took a minute. It took a minute of the journey. It's a twisting and turning to say yes to this.
Yeah. So now that you've arrived in this connection,
Yeah.
uh, how, so you said that you were going into the parking lot and sobbing and crying. Was that
Yeah.
a release or was it just like a grateful awareness of like just feeling that connection and the contrast of being in that.
Both,
Yeah.
both. I think, through the unfolding, there was like this expansion of my energy as more and more spiritual connection would flow in. It would, in a way, force me or just naturally encourage me to open deeper and open deeper. And so part of it was just like these ongoing tears of gratitude of like, wow, the light is so amazing. The light of the universe is so amazing. The spirit, the connection, the life that I feel when I'm connected in this way is so magnificent. I can't fathom it. From my experience before of my entire life, this is unfathomable. I can do nothing but cry.
Yeah.
And then also this would also bring up all of the wounding that I still hadn't healed, and from this light shine a light into those corners of myself where I had had all of this trauma that I didn't acknowledge. Some of it was deeply suppressed from my early childhood, some things with my father and with my mom, and different things where, with my dad, I didn't realize this, but I was, doing this work and just feeling the spirit. And I was like, oh, I realized I had completely suppressed that my dad used to beat me with a belt when I was little. And he would say to me, oh, thank goodness I'm not beating you as bad as my dad beat me. You should feel lucky, for example. And like those things came flooding into my awareness. And so, of course, I would cry around that pain and that sort of, for the first time as an adult, I had walled that off so much. I had no awareness for my entire adult life or even high school life, or even, that I can remember at all, that had happened to me until it came flooding in through this opening where I was able to see that part of my life. And I was like, oh, this might have been why I was so walled off and closed in certain other ways as well, is that I just wasn't aware of these parts of myself at all. So there was, that's one dramatic example, but there was many other little corners and pockets of shadow and wounding that I had to confront and accept and love and release through that experience.
Yeah. And perhaps maybe even forgiveness for
Forgiveness is
yeah.
so deep, so deep. And so because these weekend experiences were so profound for me, I just booked at this point then without any reservation. I just continued through 2019. This was like 2018, this awakening into 2019. I booked like every single possible sort of transformational workshop that could fit into my schedule. I still had my daughter half time and was working, but every weekend I was free that there was a workshop or event or anything, I just said yes to. At this point, without any reservation, whatever showed up on my radar that I had the time to do, I just said yes and did it. And I just booked back to back to back whatever experience I could get to open myself up. At this point, I saw the beauty of this opening and the beauty of this release and these processes. I just trusted whatever came my way. I just said yes to and jumped into it and just looked for all the ways at this point I could excavate and open and release myself into the union with the world. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was my 2019.
Okay, so you just mentioned that you have a daughter.
Yes.
How did that experience change your relationship with her?
So my daughter now is 16, but this was 2019. So we're almost 5 years ago, or 5 years ago, 6 years ago in that timeline when this was happening. And I remember I came back, I had a good relationship with my daughter, but this is a really dramatic experience. I love this question. I came back from that first weekend where I pulled my heart through the cave and into myself, and my daughter came to my house that next weekend. And without even any prompting, whatever, we had some chalk that had been sitting there for a long time. Um, and so she might have been 11 at this point, you know, and we had some chalk sitting there, and without any prompting, she like grabbed the chalk and just started to draw like on my porch, on our porch. I love my home and flowers and hearts and all of these things in ways that she had never done before
Mm.
on our porch leading into our house. And I just took that as like her feeling the energy shift in some way, and as an 11 12-year old just expressing it in that way. And there was a deep opening and deeper connection with her in ways that, and then I had tears of sadness that I hadn't done this healing before. In her first 11 years, I had been more cut off and not as available to her. Um, but absolutely, there was a much deeper connection. And even my ex-wife, after that, we had a deep talk and I was like, I was able to forgive her. And she's like, well, I don't believe you because I had been very angry about things for sure. She's like, well, I don't believe you. This is just fake. And I was like, no, trust me, this is true. But if you don't believe me, just wait and I'll continue to show you who I am now. And, where I was able to forgive her and have a heart to heart. And that really freed up more energy in myself. And I saw the power of forgiveness, as you mentioned earlier. Um, yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, how long did you stay in this corporate job?
I had a couple of different companies, the food industry that I chose to be in, it's a pretty tough industry where so many companies actually don't make any money. And I would get hired. I didn't love the bigger startups, and I wanted to be after being that, jet set executive flying around the whole country for a while. I was like, I didn't like that so much. It was really hard. I'd fly back and forth when my daughter was with me and fly out and doing these red eyes, and it was really tough. I loved it for a while, and I was like, no, thank you. So then I joined smaller startups in the Bay Area that I thought would be more friendly and did that for a while. Um, 2020 came, and we all know what happened in 2020. I was working for an ice cream company in the Bay Area at that point, and I got recruited into a company that sold protective gear into the food industry. And they were based because it's an import company up in South Lake Tahoe in the small mountain town, 3 hours from the Bay, where I live now. And so, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so I got a second house and I moved half time. I was still back and forth when I was with my daughter in the Bay Area. And then I was working up here in Tahoe, where I live now, in the office part-time up here and working for this import company. And that was, I was the COO leading teams all across the country. Again, pretty big level job doing negotiations with companies all across Southeast Asia and selling to some of the biggest corporations in America that I had previously negotiated with. During the time though, the last these few years, and people started to come to me, and I started to offer on the side. I was teaching programs around the spiritual awakening. I was teaching classes on Taoism. I was mentoring people around the spiritual journey in various ways, and I was slowly doing this. And it was just over a year ago when that job here in Tahoe ended. That company wasn't doing so great, and I had been slowly building up and doing this other work for a number of years, but still thinking that it was going to be on the side. But this is, back to the title of this podcast and the theme about listening to our deeper intuitions and really paying attention to the voices within and listening. For years, I had been getting the message that I should not do that, and I should full time devote my life to the spiritual awakening and supporting others in their journeys in various ways. For years, I had been getting that message that, okay, this is your true path. You need to give up these other things you're doing. I was still afraid of that
Hmm.
in various ways. And it was years of me saying, yeah, yeah, but not yet kind of thing, when I finally took the leap and said, okay, this is what I'm doing full time. And so that was just over a year ago.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you help people who are navigating their spiritual awakening? What are you able to offer and guide?
Yeah. So there's a number of ways that I support people. One of the things I call myself now a spiritual mentor, and I use that word specifically just to be like a spiritual friend. What I love to say is like we're all the same and we're all in this together. There's no hierarchy. I don't even remotely want to be sort of put myself above anyone like my teachers did with me, like my guru did, like other teachers did with me, and with disastrous results. And so it's like I've just been someone who's been walking the path for a while, and maybe for some people I might have like walked this path up this mountain and walked around the corner and seen a landslide that they haven't seen yet. And I just walked back and I can just say, hey, up here, it's like this. Let me help you get through this section because I've been through it already. Let me support you in this. And so I do spiritual mentoring with people one on one. And that can look like supporting people early on the path in terms of stabilizing what is a spiritual practice, how and when do you meditate? What does this look like? What does it feel like when I feel like this, certain things? Or also, I really love supporting people as they deepen into non-duality, into the unity of all things. So I really love people come to me, and I really love supporting them in the integration and support in that non-dual state of union. I really, really love that. I also through this process, I've also learned the Akashic Records, and we didn't talk about this whole story, but I have a long history of my ancestors, my grandfather and great grandmother came to me over years and talked to me in ways I couldn't ignore, and through that, opened me up to being a medium and channel for ancestors and spirit guides and angels of various kinds. And so I bring those tools in the service of people to help them connect with their higher selves, connect with their deeper purpose, connect with their soul's journey. I get a lot of questions right now in this time of deep awakening. I get a lot of questions from people who are like, am I crazy? I'm feeling like this is my path. Am I crazy? I feel like this is true. Can you confirm it for me? Is this right for me? Um, and I get a lot of that. And also, I do a lot of work connecting people deeper with their spirit guides and their angels to really deepen the connection. Their angels come to me and say, like, I know this person is receiving this message, but they're ignoring it. Can you support them in that connection? Uh,
Mm.
so I do that work. I do these one-on-one sessions. I also teach classes. I have an upcoming course in January on meditation. It's a Taoist program called the Unlocking the Secret of the Golden Flower. And the golden flower is the unflowering of the heart connection to the universe. So I have a deep program on that. And I also do men's work specifically to unlock the magic archetype. So the divine masculine through the entry point of magical connection to the world for men. So I have a program on that coming up as well.
Fantastic. Could you explain the Akashic Records a little bit for the listeners who might not
Yeah, I
be
would love to. And I'll just back up and I'll explain it through my little story. So I had heard about these, but this was a few years ago. I'd heard about them, but I had never experienced what they were, and I was very curious. So I never do really anything like halfway. So I booked like 6 sessions with this person, um, and was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go deep and learn what this is.
Mhm.
But this wasn't to learn how to do it. It was just to experience what it was. But in the very first session, we sit down and we talk a little bit, and she's like, okay, I'm going to go and explore the Akashic Records for you. And I just followed her along with my energy. I'd been doing spiritual work for years, of course, like as I've shared. So I just opened up and sort of tapped into her energy and followed her up to this realm. And what I realized was that, oh, this is a realm of frequency that I play in. I just didn't know it was the Akashic field and I hadn't used it in any specific way. But I was like, oh, I go here all the time. I play here. I access this field of information regularly. Oh, I might as well then learn more about this. And so I took a course with that same teacher and that same practitioner. And now I offer those sessions. So what that is for the way I see it, people call it a library of information, a library of all things. The way I see it most deeply is I see everything as vibration, or I experience energetically everything is vibration, everything is frequency. And so there are these frequency bands of ancestors. There's these frequency bands of angels and other gods and spirit guides of various kinds and other beings. And then just beyond that, the way I experience it is just beyond that realm. So I sort of tune my radio just beyond that realm of spirit guides and angels is this band of like informational vibration, and because all time is a construct of our minds. Time doesn't really exist beyond this earth. So all things are contained there because it's all right now. And all the vibrational energies from earth are contained there. So when I tune in for a person, like with you, I can tune in, I ask people to say their names, and I tune into the energies of their being and connect up and receive the information from this field of information for the service of you. And this could be, your past life. This could be your soul's purpose. This could be other information around your current situation. For me, what comes through is primarily what would be in service of your deepest unfolding. So some people might, other practitioners might just, be able to give a whole accounting of like all your past lives in sequence, And I get some of that, but
Mhm.
really not all of that maybe other people do. But I get more information specifically, like how can I give you information to unlock your highest purpose and alignment and happiness right now? That's what comes through for me. Yeah.
Okay. And when you're accessing that information, what does that feel like to be connected to that?
I love it. And when we access it, like my colleagues and I, my friends and I who do this work, we talk about this. Like I'm accessing that all the time now for myself, but also for others that I'm working with. And there's a process where you sort of open it and close it for the people you're working with, but we're still, those of us who do this a lot, we're in this soup, I call it, of spacious awareness and expansive time. One of the things that comes through that just comes through in the soup is we all have so many experiences. Our souls, our being are so vast. It's so easy on earth to feel small and isolated and individual and cut off. And there's a deep reminder in this work, doing it so frequently, of the vastness of the unity of all experience. And we also see again and again in this life and beyond how similar the wounding we have is, even though it might look different in this lifetime. At the core, how deeply similar all of us are, and how vast, again, the experience across time is for all of our souls. And so it can make each individual daily problem or challenge seem small, not in an insignificant way, in a beautiful way, but it's like I can love the small moments with appreciation because they're everything, and also they're not so important because it's so vast. So I hold both. Like it makes every moment more special, and
Yeah.
also makes every moment insignificant in a way that is loving, and like insignificant in a way that adds value to it. Like it's not important, so therefore I might as well enjoy it. It's not important how it turns out. Every moment is what it is. However it turns out, this moment is perfect. Not that I might not be suffering, but it's perfect because it's what I need for my journey, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
and it's beautiful.
Yeah, like really zooming out and seeing the
Really zooming out.
yeah.
And I want to be careful and say, like, when I'm having this really high view of like everything is beautiful and perfect, I want to really be clear that I also hold at the same time this human view of compassion for individual suffering. And this is this really beautiful balance of holding the infinite perfection of all things and also have the individual plane of compassion for everything that each of us is going through. And,
Yeah.
it's not negating the passion, it's really including that with love, including our shadow, our hardships, all the things, and holding those with so much love for all of that.
Yes. In terms of even depression,
Yeah.
and grieving, being able to look at things in that way, even for myself recently, is really powerful and expansive. Do you have
I
any insight on those things, especially like working with men a lot? I feel
yeah.
this.
I have a history of depression. I have a
Yeah.
history of you know, being overwhelmed and being cut off and being in paralysis and self-loathing and wanting to cover my head with a blanket and not come out of my room for weeks at a time when I feel embarrassed and shame and all I have that history of my life. And I love working with people because of that who are coming usually, it's people who are coming out of those states with enough awareness to reach out and contact me to have the session, because when we're deep in the paralysis of depression, we might not even have enough awareness to come out to make the appointment to do this, to show up, right? So it is people who are having enough release from those experiences to connect and say, this is my thing, I need some support. And so in those, typically, often for people with depression, we have so many angels and spirit guides who want to speak to us and support us and help us. All of us do. We all do. And so, with my sessions, I go into the Akashic field, but also as I do that, I go through the realm of ancestors and spirit guides. And so I pull down those voices first, usually. And those voices actually push themselves to me. And so, really wrapping these people, wrapping the the person I'm working with in the loving guidance of like, you're loved so much. All of these beings, all of the support is here in the universe. You are surrounded by love, and really offering them this context of spacious, loving presence, but the goodness of the universe and the touch points for, offering, it's individual for each person, but offering each person the touch points and references for the goodness and spaciousness of their own experience. I encourage people to go outside and touch and hug trees and connect with those energies and the grass and the sky and the waters, which are also all alive. And I encourage people to sit in the spaciousness, even if it feels bad, and just be with that, with it being what is. And then also encourage people really to, from the longing of their heart, to reach up from our hearts to the angels beyond, to our guides, to connect with the wonder of what's beyond us. And if we, for those it's appropriate, for those who feel called to connect deeper with the realms beyond, when we reach forward with gratitude and love and longing from our hearts, this is the path of unlock. And they're reaching down to us metaphorically with their little hooked hands that we can just grab onto as we reach up. This is what I'm shown.
What is your take on how karmic relationships are found within the Akashic Records, and it can help us make sense of things in the bigger picture?
Absolutely. And so, karmic relationships, that could be, ancestors who have passed who still are influencing us. It could be our family. It could be our partners, romantic partners, etc. It could be other friendships that still have this deep karmic context. So one of the things that shows up frequently in the Akashic Records, and it's easily seen and determined, is just how deep some of these connections are. You're shown really easily and clearly. Oh, just for example, I was with someone yesterday who I've also worked with her sister. So I've worked separately with two sisters. I've never worked with them together. I don't talk about each other with each other, but I was doing a reading for one of the sisters, and I just saw clearly in her records how she had been with her sister for lifetimes, many, many, many lifetimes. And just without being specific, just how that had entangled them in all of these ways across, you know, forever. And was able just to offer, then from that I was able to see some of the tangles. So for me, what it looks like is like there's these timelines of energy which are our lives, and sometimes they get twisted or tangled, or even like ripples of a river. And sometimes it just takes, we need to just unravel them or unripple them, or just like move them over into the middle of the river so they're smoother, kind of thing. And that's just an analogy for energetically what it feels like to nudge or point people. It's not moving them myself, it's pointing in the direction and nudging them so they have the awareness to move over here. Like pushing on the shoulder gently to say like move aside because someone's coming through, kind of energy. It's that. It's encouraging people to move themselves and take ownership. Um, and then aligning what is to release. With ancestors, it's a little different because they're not here in physical form to do the shifting. So with ancestor work, what I do is I open up a cone of presence, of nowness that extends into the past and the future because there's no time. And so I extend this cone of deep presence where then the ancestral timeline is in the present, and then work with, I can feel the ancestral energies where there's frequently right now, right? There's this term out there that I hear a lot in my world. It's called the witch wound, where many of us, and it's true for men as well. So many of us have ancestors who for the last few thousand years were persecuted for their connection to spirit, their connection to herbalism, to their connection to the land, connection to all things that's not in religion, right? So this wounding we have, and so people are afraid to express their spirituality, partly because for generations it was unsafe. And their great grandmothers, great great grandmothers, and other past lives are energetically transmitting the fear and the warning out of love to us now that, oh, it's not safe to be fully expressed in this way because I was killed. Literally like that, right? And in other ways, I was persecuted in these ways. So in those ways, what I do is bring those energies into the present, and then with myself, with the person together, beam loving acceptance and show them the safety of the world now, to release that hook and allow the spiritual unfolding to occur, for example. So that's another example of, these are karmic patterns of these past ancestors, relationships, lifetimes of fear that are echoing to the present, and then allowing those to be released through love.
Yeah. And okay. So how does that affect, how does the nowness affect the present? Does that question make sense?
Sometimes, and it's not all the time, it depends, but there are times when literally we do sessions, I do sessions with people, and entirely and completely, mm, and I'm going to say like I can change their situation, but it's really me getting out of the way. And I want to be really clear too. There is an I doing something, but I'm not doing this. It's being done through me in a way. It's not me. I just want to be clear on that. But for simplicity, I can say like I did this. But there are sessions where through this healing I just described, people have complete healing and resolution of those energies, and they can completely make a switch, and their life going forward can be different after one session. That happens. And there's other times when it's maybe more twisted, more complicated, more things happening, more other influences when it takes a minute, or other sessions or other work. Maybe it's, sessions with me plus other healing work somewhere else. That's also, okay. For sure, of course, to unravel that. But there is absolutely release and healing and a shift in the person's ability to move forward with freedom and self-determination. Because these karmic relationships, whether they're, even loving, beautiful partnerships, twin flames, and in the best of ways, and all of these things, they're still entanglements, even if we judge them to be good and positive and beautiful, which they can be, but they're still influencing us in certain ways. And so the question is, what is our goal? Is our goal in this life to have a beautiful relationship and have that deep, powerful twin flame thing going on? Okay, beautiful. That's perfect. Let's leave that alone. Is your goal to be more free and have free agency in how you move through the world and your connection with the universe? Well, then maybe we don't want those as much. Maybe we want to have the freedom to then interact individually as we choose with full agency without those influences upon us.
Mm.
Yeah. So there's a deepening of the freedom that people experience.
Could you explain what a twin flame is?
I will explain what a twin flame is, and I will also just again preface this by saying that there's no one definition and there's many people with opinions. And I'm not here to say that they're wrong or that they're right. Just like I don't think there's one definition, but this is how I see it. This is how it
Great.
comes forward for me with my scene. I just want to really be clear on that. Because again, there are people who have very specific views on this that, with all respect, to me, right? So we have many lifetimes, and our souls are in before we come to Earth, our souls have different constellations of relationship. And so, like in my life, there's certain people that I meet, and I'm sure many of us have this experience where we just meet somebody and we know that we're deep friends and we know that there's this deep thing. And that can be a twin flame is that plus a deep romantic, often sexual, often karmic overlay times 100 on that. It's really no different from that, but we've made this bond across lifetimes, many lifetimes, so deeply that we're going to continue to come back with each other as romantic partners, as co-creators in our evolutionary path across lifetimes. So that's my definition of a twin flame is two souls, not people, two souls before Earth that have chosen across all time to come back as romantic partners to help untangle each other and or journey together through lifetimes. And that can come back, people can alternate back and forth between the masculine and feminine partner, and it can look lots of different ways. It's more common for people to have like deep family constellations or friend constellations where sisters across time and can be mothers and daughters and sons and even friends that are close to the group. They're, constellations of like 10 souls are not uncommon. And then with larger groups, just to expand this, like many spiritual groups and other circles, there's these souls that come together where we're just like we're here to just like again like boink you on the forehead and remind you of truth, but I might be a little bit more distant from your core twin flame group, but I'm still a karmic partnership of across time. We're going to continue to remind ourselves to point towards spirit. Does that
Yeah. Yeah, that helps. Is there usually, I don't want to say always because saying always isn't good,
For sure.
a lesson attached to these karmic relationships?
Yeah. I'm going to say always, always, because a karmic relationship is one in which there's, by definition of the karma, is we have some unsolved, unlearned lesson to learn. There's some another way to say that is there's some unresolved energy that is wrapped up in this form of a learning, a lesson, a question, a path, a tragedy, a love, some path of life that hasn't been resolved in our energy so far across lifetimes. And this could be, we choose this sometimes, so in the Buddhist path, right, there's a bodhisattva vow that we're going to come back across all time to help everyone release. And in some ways, until we're the highest bodhisattva, then we're still in our karmic. When we make that vow, that's our karma to come back. That's a karmic tie to come back and help others, but that's still a karmic tie. It's a beautiful karmic tie, perhaps from one judgment, but it's still a karmic tie, right? It doesn't have to be negative per se by our judgment. So when it's a relationship, twin flame relationship, karmic pattern, so from a different perspective, these are also very closely related to trauma bonding relationships,
Yeah.
right? And that's a whole different conversation, but they overlap. So,
Yeah.
a trauma bonding, for those who don't know, is, two people who have, childhood or early development wounding that come together and see the wound in each other and recognize safety in the familiarity of that pattern of behavior. Right? Yeah, would you?
Yeah,
That
I would say yes.
that's that, I'm not a psychologist or whatever, but that's the definition of like a trauma bond. And a karmic twin flame is similar in that, but it's energetic and across time, across lifetimes. That we're two souls who have a pattern of energetic coherence that we see in each other, that we're going to make an agreement with our souls to support this unraveling and growth, hopefully, to come together, but there needs to be an impetus to bring that together, right? So when we think about the spiritual path, there are some beings who are completely resolved, so completely that they actually light body, it's called, into the ethereal realms. So there's beings that, they're so resolved in themselves that when they die, they just light body into all things. So those beings are not, I don't know this for sure, but the mythology around those beings is that they're completely resolved into everything of the universe. They're not coming back as a soul unless they want to, tied up with a twin flame relationship that keeps coming back again with another person. They would be free from that, for example. They could choose to come back if they wanted, but they wouldn't need to. There'd be no compulsion to do that. With a twin flame, for as long as that relationship lasts, there's this karmic pull where it's like, I need to be with this person and I don't always even know why. There's a compulsion sometimes. And it can be tied into, if we're not healed, that can get wrapped up into our own wounding. And this is where it can get messy because we
Yeah.
can, we intermix our spiritual karmic pull to a person with my own wounding, and all of a sudden we have this soup of misunderstood attachment, right? Like there are people that I know that I'm deeply close to on a spiritual level, that I'm deeply attracted to in an energetic pull, and I know because I've done the work that they're not my partners. It's just that, these people and I, there's a few of them that have been with me for lifetimes, but I don't need to actually resolve anything with them. It's just there's a recognition that, oh, I know this soul across lifetimes, but I'm lucky that I've done the work where I don't need to like play that out anything right now with them. That's also
Yeah.
possible, right? But when we mix those two of like, I see you for lifetimes and also I'm in my wounding, and let's do this dance together. Well, that can be also gorgeous and also can be disastrously traumatic because it's so strong.
Right. And I never really thought of this before, but also it is kind of like an inner voice of drawing you to that
Yeah.
person to
Oh, yeah.
resolve that thing, whether it be painful or toxic or really difficult. or beautiful or rewarding.
And so for this, I recommend everyone to go through A New Earth, Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, a beautiful book about the pain body and these relationship dynamics. I think that book does an amazing job of working through this and also providing pathways to healing around this. There's other resources too, but that's a really beautiful one. He really deeply dives into these dynamics, not from a twin flame perspective, but by healing our own souls and our own psychologies deep enough to see another human and recognize why and how I want to entangle with them, consciously. Why and how do I want to continue to, it's not just, I think you're beautiful, attractive, whatever, I want something from you. Okay, that's fine, then no judgment. But like, how deeply do I want to do that and why? And am I untangling my karma by doing this? Am I unfolding my life or am I re-entangling myself further by these actions with another? Right. This is a really deep point of discrimination that I use every moment with every relationship, romantic,
Mhm.
work related, personal, friends, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter how deep the relationship is. Is this person I'm going to interact with going to deepen my entanglements or help me release or keep me free and open and we can be free and open together, separate and together, right? How can I? So for me, I'm at a place where it's like, I'm not interested in creating more entanglements. I've done a lot of unraveling. I've done a lot of work on unraveling. I'm still doing it. I'm not interested in adding some more right now. I'm looking to continue to unravel and then surround myself with people who are equally, it doesn't mean being alone. It means finding those people at our frequency, finding those
Mhm.
people who are also doing the work, who also value the same things, who can come together with their own accountability,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And
To do it consciously.
consciously,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, these are great questions. And I think this is really, this is where so many of us, all of us are working relationships. Our relationships are, our primary, whatever they may be, personal, family, romantic, friendships. These are the primary ways that we receive feedback around how and what we're doing. I mean, Ram Dass famously said, if you think you're, all enlightened, just go home for Thanksgiving,
Right.
or some
Yeah.
paraphrase of that, right?
Yeah, I think it's also really interesting about the trauma bonding thing and how pop psychology has sort of entered the scene and how that is commenting on these things like narcissism and how that's combined with these karmic relationships, perhaps.
Well, it also then, yes, and I'm gonna add one more piece is that our societal expectations around roles for men and women and and relationships in general and how has that changed and or not changed across time, and right now in every moment, are we choosing someone and then if we're mutually choosing each other, are we playing out relationships truly because of our own karmas and desires? Or are we choosing relationships and patterns within relationships because of societal expectations around how these should look?
Mhm.
And and is that going to be congruent with our needs for our soul individually to again unravel and release our ties with all things in this world? Because again, as we release all of our ties, we can still be in community. In fact, we can be with someone deeper when we're free than we can when we're stuck in our traumas and shadows. It just looks different. So, a deep trauma bond looks really good until it blows up, right? It looks, oh, that's such a great couple. They're so tight. They're so with each other or whatever. And then if you get to be friends with those people, you see like, oh, they're both deeply unhappy and playing out this reciprocal pattern. In some cases, this is some fantasy I'm weaving right now. These reciprocal patterns of abuse and reactivity, which can look really good until again someone then blows it up and it can be disastrous, for example.
There's also the piece of self-love and self-worth within relationships, right?
Yes.
And I feel that there can also be a part of some sort of like spiritual bypassing that can happen when you're within a relationship to not put yourself first.
Well, I can attest, I mentioned earlier that, I, my marriages and many other relationships I've had have been examples of that in various ways, for sure. And, looking for ourself in another, to back up for a second, right? So here's one of the things that people I think is useful to share, that what I've been shown through the work I've done is that, love is actually the closest that we humans in this realm, in this 3D physical realm that we're in, can get to experience the totality of the beauty of the universe. So depending on your belief, it could also say, for those that this is congruent with, that love is the closest we can get to God. Love is the fabric of connection to all things. And, you know, even I can go further that from this perspective, again, love actually is the way that the divinity of the universe comes into this realm and enters us and is the fabric of all connection. So when we say, I love you in a romantic way, and especially I am in love with you, when people fall in love, what's really happening from this perspective is that two people are vulnerably opening up and sharing themselves with each other, and that creates a space wherein the joy and wonder of the universe can come in to their lives, right? And we mistake that for, oh, this person gives me this feeling.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
When really it's our own opening, vulnerable sharing that allows the space for the love to come in, which is always present everywhere. Love is always present everywhere for everyone if we so choose to open to it. And so we mistake the love for this person and then attach all of this importance to this person when truly it's the experience of every moment that allows the love to appear. And so as we expand into our spiritual awareness across all traditions, we drop from our head dominated world to a heart centered world through that process, through that journey, and connection to all things through our hearts. And that allows actually a true connection with another human without the grasping, because I know the love is already here. If the love is everywhere, yes, it's beautiful. And we're made on earth, we're made to be expressive with another human and to share this journey with another human. This is a beautiful way to express our humanity and gorgeous. And also, I feel the love of the universe always with a partner and without.
Right.
Right, right. So it's not denying that partnership is a beautiful thing. It is. It's an amazingly beautiful, powerful way for us to interact through the world. And yes, absolutely beautiful in every possible way. Go for it. Do it. And also, can we step back and realize that we actually are love? Love is everywhere, and we don't need to receive that from another.
Right. But also receiving is really important as well. Like being able to
So
receive.
it's not reject. Yeah, yeah. So thank you. Yeah. So this is not the rejection of receiving. This is like, I already have everything, but then it feels really amazing. This is this powerful thing of sharing and receiving. And so there's this transmission, there's a continuous transmission of energy across all things, and especially between two humans that have come together romantically, that have, we have the same energy bodies that line up and can receive and give to each other in really deep ways. And this is, it goes back to the tantric practice of, you align your chakras and you share the energy with another human. And this can expand sexuality, but also can expand relationships in all the ways when we realize that we're aligned and we can share communication, energy, love, connection with another human. And then, oh, from this partnership of two of us sharing and supporting each other, from there, how can we then radiate this out into the universe beyond and create change and love in our communities and in the world beyond, right? Two people coming together can create a powerful battery of energetic transformation and change across, communities for sure, and the world and universes for certain as well.
Yes. I have a question for you in regards to the Tantra.
Yeah,
And
let's go.
um because I'm currently getting my PhD in psychology right now. And
Beautiful.
my research is focused on the boundaries of performers, specifically actors in intimate scenes. And I'm really fascinated by the connection of creativity and sexuality.
Okay. Okay. Love it. I love this. Okay. So, but I love the way you framed it too, and I just want to understand. So you talked about the I don't know how you have it. The performance of the boundaries and performance. Will you say that again? Boundaries and performance. Clarify
Yeah.
again
So
that the
actors,
actors. Okay.
the boundaries of actors who perform
Within sexuality.
intimate scenes together
Intimate
and
scenes.
characters, because yeah, there's a lot of like energetics that are at play there because there's personal and character and there's story and
So, and this is a path, right? I want to be clear that so the path of Tantra class, I want to be really clear as well. My background is in classical Kashmiri Tantra. That's the, it's not Neo Tantra. It's not, there's other views that I didn't study. So this is classical Kashmiri Tantra. The view is that, and this is a path, a goal, maybe a goalless goal, but the orientation is that we move into our energy beyond story. So we drop the acting. And I
okay.
realize that's a goal, right? So people are we working towards that perhaps, right? So because then so initially if there's an actor, there's ourselves, there's our soul and our heart space, and then there's actually, there's the wounded self to use this model, right? There's the wounded self, that's the actor, perhaps, right? Acting, projecting out into the world what wants to be seen, and then there's another partner who's doing the same thing. So there's maybe other layers of the actors as well within that. There's a few layers of actors with different needs showing up, as well as the soul behind all of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
From one framework, is this what you're right? And so that's complicated, right? So a lot of sexuality, that's complicated, and that's most of my experiences with sexuality across my life have been there's my soul and my need to connect, or intimate experiences broadly beyond sexuality, right? There's my soul, and then there's my fears and my wounding, and then there's how I show up beyond those fears and wounding. And those different layers want different things, and I want protection and safety, but I also want vulnerability and to be seen, and there's a push and pull in that, and then the other person is also doing a push and pull dance, and then because both of us came together because we saw each other's wounding and felt safety in the wounding, we're both then poking on the wounded spots of the other person. In my experience, this has been my experience growing up, and it gets complicated and messy, and usually one person in my experience has gotten hurt and ran off, and it's been messy, and there's been a lot of misunderstandings. So there's that experience that I've had, in my lifetime many times, versus the tantric experience of it's not negating that we might have those wounded places or those actor parts of ourselves. It's for a moment dropping into our energy and acknowledging with love and compassion that those parts might be here, but saying, hey, with this person, with another, let's drop into our energy. Let's maybe put those aside with compassion for a minute. Can we come together straight as much as possible in the energy and connect with the experience right now with each breath?
Mhm.
What would happen, right? The question with Tantra is, what would happen if you and I came together with each breath in this moment with our energy in this intimate scene and dropped away all the rest, and we're just right here, right now, connecting fully in whatever intimate way we need, right? Tantra doesn't have to be sexuality, even it can just be intimate connection, right? Eye gazing, hand holding, hugging, all the forms. That's also the same. There's no hierarchy actually in tantra and true tantra to what it's whatever it is in the moment. So what happens then is it can be magical, powerful, because when we both agree on these rules at first, or maybe rules are artificial rules at first, of okay, we're going to put these parts of ourselves aside a little bit to practice this at first. I'm going
Yeah.
to practice being with the energy with another human. For some people, this might be the first time or the only time in their life they've been fully seen and connected with so vulnerably and deeply, for example.
Right. And I think a point that you brought up that is really important is the rules or like the boundaries around that and the safety within that.
Absolutely. Yeah, because there's so much vulnerability. And so, right. And so it's important to create, whether it's however long we're in this room together, however long we're in this exercise, and there'll be an into this behavioral pattern that we're going to have run its course, the into this sexual contact, whatever it might be. And then we go back to whatever we were doing. Now, ultimately, the idea is as a spiritual path would be over time, there's more and more of the true connection behind the wounding, and even that through this connection, those actors can slowly fall away through the love and connection that we experience. This is that's one version of this path, is that through this ongoing connection with another human or humans, partners, that the wounded parts of myself, the acting parts of myself can slowly fall away because there's so much intimate connection and deep seeing and being seen and witnessing that the healing occurs through that, right? This is a path of healing and resolution.
Yes. What about attachment within that? How is attachment looked upon?
Attachments, from this perspective, attachments would be a product of the wounding,
Mhm. That's what I was, yeah.
right? Attachments are a product of the wounding because attachments are another way of saying you have something that I need. And as we deepen on the spiritual journey, we realize that we have everything. And it doesn't mean that I don't gain from merging and playing this dance with another, because I do gain from this. So it's this interesting dance of I have everything, I need nothing, and yet still I gain from dancing with you in this partnership, right? So I have everything, I need nothing, but still there's something to gain by being with you in this way. It's holding both of those, right? It's holding the from the Taoist perspective, it's holding the fullness of the emptiness while holding the emptiness of the fullness. So it's the full yin and the yang and the yang and the yin simultaneously, both of those, and they're both more complete when they come together, even though both are complete unto themselves. It's holding that dichotomy that allows the space wherein there's no attachment, that allows the space wherein the attachment, wherein true non-attachment is possible. So there's a lot of bypassing in this. This is tricky. This is deep stuff. This is advanced. This is like Olympic level spirituality. This is not, this is deep. This is in the deep end of the pool, because there's so much of dysfunction in these worlds, in my experience, when there's bypassing and there is attachment, and there's bypassing and there is deeper desire, and there's bypassing and there is the need for other abusive, self-serving behaviors because we have unserved needs. There's these parts of our actors that still need to receive something, even if we're pretending to be this. And so there's a lot of that in all ways. And I think in a lot of Western view, especially when we have in our culture, we have so much culturally, in my perspective, dysfunction around sexuality and intimacy of all kinds broadly. We're not taught intimacy in a healthy way broadly, in my experience growing up in the West, in the US and beyond. So when people come into these, especially again, with all respect, there's some communities of neo-tantra that I think really beautiful, and some communities of neo-tantra where there's a lot of this dysfunction in there. Neo-tantra broadly would be these tantric ideas sort of integrated with Western psychology and Western overlay. There could be other definitions, but in a general way, I'm going to say broadly it would be that. And in some of these communities where there's fewer rules, because in classical tantra it's clear that this is an advanced, deep, committed spiritual path. That's the assumption that everyone who shows up for classical tantra is deeply committed. If you want to do a lighter path, you can do Buddhism or you can do other forms of Vedantic path. There's many paths that are less of a commitment. But Tantra says we're going to work with the messy stuff. We're going to throw you in the deep end. And so everyone who shows up into the room is committing to do their own work, to say, I'm committed to the spiritual path first and foremost. This is a journey of self-discovery and connection with the divine. And I'm going to come to you with that in mind. In many Western forms of Tantra, it's, oh, I want to have a deeper sexual experience with another human. And so that attachment can easily form, right? Tantra groups come together, oh, I want to have, and they can be, orgiastic and all come together, or they can just be individual. I want individual connection and everything in between. And there's no judgment on that. I think people need that and it's beautiful. We need connection. All of that's, there's no judgment at all on either spectrum of any of that. It's all perfect. And also, everyone shows up to those rooms of interaction with different assumptions and different levels of healing. And not everyone in all of those rooms is fully committed on the spiritual path of individual self-accountability.
Interesting. Yeah, I was just thinking yesterday about the messiness of everything and how there's so much beauty in the messiness, and to try to like just fit everything in its neat little box is not really necessarily expensive.
Well, that's it. So if you're coming in to a messy room of people who are doing stuff, whatever, intimate interactions of whatever kind, and and I go into that room and I have my own work and I can see the messiness as the beauty of all things and as the gorgeousness of the expression of life, well, then I can't get hurt. And actually, right, I can come into a room of mess and interaction, and if I'm clean with my intentions, I'm not going to create karmas for others nor for myself, even if other people might be creating those karmic attachments through messiness with each other, right? I can go into a messy room of karmic attachments and still come out clean, not creating more for myself or others in this way if we're clear with ourselves, right? We can only be clear with ourselves. And the clarity comes from deep alignment with what is our intention. And that comes from knowing in our heart space, from the Taoist perspective, heart wisdom, loving and accepting all the parts of our traumas and shadows and bringing it up into awareness of every moment of what is true for me.
Mhm. Creating that anchor of safety within yourself to come back to always.
And safety can look, safety, I get this question even this morning in a meditation class around energy. This is going to loop back to Tantra, but I was doing a meditation class this morning where we were expanding our heart space out to all things and breathing in from the 10,000 directions into our heart and breathing out in the 10,000 directions to all things. And one of the people afterwards said, I was scared to breathe in all things because what if I don't want to breathe in all the bad stuff? Right. And so we had a whole discussion around, well, what does safety look like? And there's many kinds of safety, but there's two extremes of safety that I love to play with. One of which is we can create a wall around ourselves, a wall of safety. And that can be energetically if we're talking about breath work, but it can be a wall of isolation with another human, and that can be in a relationship where I can still have a wall of isolation, or it can be, I can be by myself. I'm safe by myself in my little hut and no one's going to bother me. I'm just over here alone. I'm fine. Right. That would be a wall of isolation. So there's safety in that, but there's loneliness and separation. The other way of safety, then on the other extreme, is I'm going to show up with so much centered love
Mhm.
and love in the purest sense of connective, positive, glowing, spiritually aware interaction. And around me is this mist of so much light that no matter what comes my way, it gets dissolved and alchemized instantly by this cloud of light and love. Not in a bypassing way. Holding it's in myself, I'm holding the shadow and the light so deeply that this cloud of presence is here and inexplicable, so that whatever comes at me just is vaporized into the loving mist around me. So it's not isolation, it's just so much openness. The other way to say this more clear, perhaps, is there's so much openness that there's nowhere for any missiles to land.
Mm.
The bullet can't hit me if I'm just open into the universe. It's like that. There's so much openness that I can't be hurt. I'm so open, I'm so loving, I'm so free. There's nothing, right? But I'm still connecting fully. This is not a bypassing of like some weirdness. So those are two extremes of safety, and both are equally valid. I prefer the one of connecting through so much open light that everything, again, I can walk into a messy room and
Mm.
I might not want to, but whatever. If I choose, if there's a reason I'm there, I'm not going to get hurt. And maybe even this light might even support others into finding their own heart space as well, perhaps, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Love,
And
where are you going? I see your mind going. Where is it going?
yeah, that's wonderful. And perhaps that light wouldn't even be possible to be that open if you were not hurt where the light could enter.
Well, I think I'm curious if I understand what you're saying correctly, because in my life, the light that I carry now is bright when it is as it is because I've had so much wounding that I've healed all those parts, or I am healing some of them still. I'm not pretending I'm all healed. I'm saying, I've healed many of my parts enough that I can predominantly be in the light, and then I'm still holding those parts of me that are not healed with such tender, forgiving, loving awareness that they're coming around. And that allows, yeah, that allows it to be so. I believe that's true. There are those people, though. This is not absolute. There are those people that just were born blessed in some way and haven't had any traumas and are just really in the light. There are those folks. That wasn't my experience, but I've met them. I've met them. I do these sessions with people where I see people's traumas, I see people's shadows, I see people's ripples and tangles and entanglements. And I rarely, but sometimes meet with people. There's a few of them I've met where I'm like, I don't see any ancestral trauma. I don't see any family trauma. Like, you're free. And some of those people, it's actually confusing. They're so free. They're like, okay, but what should I do? Right? Because much of what we do, much of our compulsions through our lives, for most of us, for many of us, from my experience, is playing out, unraveling, and dealing with the ripples of our life, push us forward into something and give us that. And so people who are so free, they're like, whoa, what do I do with this freedom? You know?
Contrast is really important to recognize where to go sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, I love this.
Yeah. All right. Well, if people would like to work with you on any level,
Yeah,
so you can help them access these parts of themselves, where can
sure.
we get and how what does that look like?
Absolutely. So you can reach out to me on my website, Natural Heart Alchemy, as well as my Instagram's the same at Natural Heart Alchemy. And, I have a variety of types of sessions available on my website. I have Akashic shadow healing sessions. I have, mediumship sessions, spiritual mentoring, different types of sessions. The truth is there's different offerings, but really when people come to me, like what happens is in the moment, we create the healing that needs to happen. So the truth is, I have offerings so that people know what's available to come to me and to know how to interact. But the truth is that if you hear this and this feels right to you, then we create the work for each individual person as it happens. And then on my website, there's also these variety of courses that I have, the men's work, as well as this Golden Flower course launching in January, where we do a deep multi-month dive into awareness, non-duality, meditation, and presence in a really powerful way. So, yeah, Natural Heart Alchemy.
All right, cool. I'll put that into the show notes so people
Oh,
can click
thank you.
easily. Is there anything on the top of your heart or your mind that we haven't addressed yet?
No, I mentioned this again, but my guides are just really wanting to double down on this. Like, no matter where all of us are in this journey, we're all perfectly where we need to be, even when it feels really hard. We're all right where we need to be. And like the miraculous unfolding, even in the hard places of what can come from where we are, can happen. Sometimes it takes a while, and sometimes it can be like, oh my goodness, my life is so different in timelines that I couldn't expect. And so, just wherever you are listening to this, just really, I encourage, deep compassion and acceptance for wherever you are. And then just wherever you choose to be, if you have an impulse to make any changes, just like shift your energy in that direction and it will unfold beautifully and naturally in whatever way it needs to for you and for your journey. And the second thing quickly is just again, like we are all surrounded by so much support, by so much light, by so many angels, by so many guides that if we just open up our hearts and connect to the world around us, there's so much loving support and guidance for us, keeping us where our souls want to be on this journey. So I just encourage people to open their hearts and connect with the world around them and all the universes around them.
Yeah, thank you. So I have one last question to wrap up the conversation, and that is if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
You are love. You are love. Everything is love. Yeah, it's not a cliche. This is like love is the fabric of everything. Love is the universe. We are love. I am love. You are love. The connection between us is love. The trees are love. Everything, even when it doesn't feel like it, is love.
Mm.
And that's everything. And everything is just this, this moment, right? We can't do anything with the future because we can't touch that. And the past, we can't do anything with the past. That's already happened. And all we can do is every moment, what can I choose in this moment? How can I choose this moment to feel the most alive, to feel the most connected, to feel the most joy, to feel the most expansiveness, to honor my feelings when it's hard in this moment. Even in the pain, how do I honor that with joy, honoring the pain? In every moment, what can I do to show up in this moment? That's the gift of this life, is every breath, every breath. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this far-ranging conversation. This has been a delight, and thanks so much. It's been a joy. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much, and until next time, stay tuned in to you.